Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today we have a very special guest. We have Sean Paul Bedell. How are you doing?
Hi, great. Thanks so much for having me, Rash. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. So the first question is the toughest, and then we're gonna relax and just have fun. How would you briefly describe yourself to our audience here, and what would you say?
Sure. Well, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Sean. My professional writing name, I go by Sean Paul Bedell, which is actually my full name. So I'm a husband, a father of two adult children. I have a golden retriever named Maggie, whose full name is Margaret Atwood. Um, and I love to write and have been writing since as long as I can remember. It's a real part of the fabric of who I am. I currently work as a safety professional, and I've been in that field since I retired from the paramedic world, and I was a first responder as well. So I've been in the safety world for a long time. To me, it was a kind of natural progression. I live in Dartmouth in Nova Scotia, a beautiful province and beautiful part of the country. And we have a cabin up in the mountain called North Mountain that we love to go to. That's in the middle of 25 acres of pristine beauty. And I'd like to go there often to write and reflect and just get out of the hectic pace of the city. So, in a nutshell, I'd say that's me.
That's awesome, wonderful, and I love that the writing part is really important. That's something that's stuck with you. I mean, you've done a lot of things, but writing has always been there, and you do have your latest book, Shoebox, which we're going to talk about. Yeah, so what is that about? And it's a gritty story from what I know.
Exactly. Yes, it's a gritty realism. I like to use that phrase to describe it. So it's about a paramedic who has suffered some grief and loss in both his personal and professional life, and he really needs to work through a lot of his own feelings and his own sense of. He feels that he's a dedicated paramedic, really enjoys making a positive impact in people's lives, but he feels that that has been thrown into question by the events that have happened to him in his life, and he's just questioning his overall effectiveness as a paramedic, and he experiences some, like I said, grief and some trauma around that. He doesn't fully recognize that he's in the throes of some problems, so he keeps on keeping on, but he ultimately clings, I hope, to some hope and some positive aspects of what it is that he's done. And a lot of people have told me that have read the book, they feel a deep emotional attachment to the character, which I take as a compliment, and it's how they relate to the story. So that's
Mhm.
Shoebox.
Wonderful. And so is there elements of your personal life that you're exploring as well? Like, is it slightly autobiographical? I mean, as because you do have your own experiences of the paramedic world, which is again, just thank you for your service for that. I think that's like anyone who does that and faces stress and trauma on basically a daily basis. I've to help others. I have just admiration for that.
Well, thank you. And I really enjoyed that part of my career. Has had many paths, but I really enjoyed the paramedic piece of it. I did it for many years, and uh, yes, it does show up in the book. The
Mhm.
book is fiction, to be clear, and
Mhm.
it's
Sure.
it's made up stories, but they're obviously based in some reality, either calls that I've done myself, or calls that my crewmates or shift mates have done, or calls that I've heard about, as well as just the overall description of the profession. And in fact, the opening scene starts in a fire station in Halifax that I worked in for many shifts, and it's a grand old fire station. And back in those days, when I worked as a medic, we were housed with the firefighters. So, and then there's lots of anecdotes of calls that the main character goes on, and
Mhm.
some good, some bad, some funny, some happy, some sad. So all of those, of course, are have a smidge of reality that started them, but of course, to work them into a story, you have to make a few changes and massage them a bit. But definitely,
Mhm.
100% my career as a medic, and before that as a firefighter, definitely show up in this book.
Mhm. And so with trauma, and she said there's personal trauma, but then there's also the professional side, so that adds to it. And is there like a way where it kind of gets blurry and like one kind of influences the other and leaps into or sinks into that part of life? Or do you think like as the character or even perhaps yourself, is it a way of balancing those and keeping them separate in a way?
For the character, he struggles with the separation of the two, and he has some personal trauma that spills over into his work life, and vice versa. His work life, the events that he goes to, he sometimes can't shake the memory of them or the feeling of them when he's trying to be at home. And in fact, at one point in the book, um, I forget the exact phrase, I'd have to find it, but he basically says, when I'm at home, all I do is think of work. And when I'm at work, all I do is can't wait to get home. So that's the
Right.
torturous balance that Steve is the main character's name. That's the balance that he's in. And he doesn't, throughout the book, he does gain more clarity on that. But initially, he's confused, he's a bit angry, he's a nice guy, he's a bit of a jerk, he's all kinds of things, and he doesn't quite piece together why he is feeling this way. And I think that echoes what people who experience post traumatic stress disorder actually do understand. They don't get why they feel this way sometimes, and then as they think through it or talk through it or act through it, it becomes a little bit more clear for them.
Is it something that you become maybe a bit desensitized as you go along, whether again the character or your experiences, where it becomes a bit easier to deal with, but sometimes where you just forget that there is all this like stress and trauma and you just kind of ignore it or don't listen to your body telling you certain things, like a certain kind of burnout that's not just physical, but also here emotional, mental, and so on?
Oh, I think so for sure. I think both people working as first responders and the character in the book, they do uh, sometimes ignore signs
Mhm.
and symptoms that they
Mhm.
should address. There's a
Mhm.
huge stigma around self-care, particularly when I worked as a medic. It was very much a male-dominated profession. It's not so much now. But men, I can say this being one, we're bad at sharing feelings. We're bad at acknowledging that things are not going so well, and we're bad at most especially seeking help when we need it. And the character in the book has all of those bad traits. Um, Eventually, he grows through them and tries to overcome some of them. But yeah, it's when you're in the middle of what we would call a trauma triggered state, it's hard to even realize that what has brought it on. And in fact, in my first book, Somewhere There's Music, which had a very small part in it about not small, but one of the characters was a paramedic, and he didn't even realize as well that he was experiencing this stuff, but yet it was impacting all his family in the story. And because people that I talked to and people that read the book, that first one really related to that aspect and really liked it, when I did this second novel, I focused on that uh, from start to finish. The character uh, is a paramedic, is the main character all through the book, and part of that was to help bring some of this stuff to light, to help bring PTSD to light, to help bring
Yes.
mental health and mental health issues to light, and to talk about it. So you can never go wrong with communication and with talking.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important. And so what role does community play or society? And I can see it being kind of a double-edged sword, like in some ways good, some ways bad. And I'd like to explore that because people think of community as always as something positive, which it is, but there's also other parts that we have to acknowledge. And specifically here, when you mention men and not expressing their feelings, well, there's a reason for it in terms of also society, in terms of evolution, in terms of our past. So it's not like a choice like, I'm just gonna do this. I'm just not gonna express my feelings. It's much more complicated than that. And I think community is kind of like that too, right?
For sure. And in the novel, community is that double-edged sword for Steve. He he acknowledges the shifts that he's on is all men. And like I said, that's not always the case, but for illustration, I did that in that story a couple of times, because there's one scene in the book, for example, where they're sitting at a restaurant, and Steve is kind of has this interior monologue going where he talks about all the stuff that it's okay to talk about and okay to admit. You could admit that the partner you're working with left a sink full of dirty dishes, and how that was just, rude and not a hospitable environment, but you can't talk about the call you just did where somebody unfortunately passed away and now you're dwelling on it. You can talk about people's wives or girlfriends or what you did on the weekend and all that stuff, but you can't talk about how you wished you had done a different treatment that would have had a different outcome on a call. So he really has that sense of community in that all the coworkers, all the paramedics, and their broader circle of medical staff and firefighters, that sort of thing, are all part of that community. But even though the character looks to that community for support, sometimes he gets a little bit of derision, a little bit of grief from them, because he feels he doesn't always fit in, because he has these feelings that he's done some things wrong, that he's caused bad stuff to happen. And when he tries to discuss that, but just realizes that would just make him seem way too vulnerable for his own liking. So he avoids the subject, or makes jokes, or gets angry, or that sort of thing. All those typical things, aren't they, that men do when they avoid the real issue.
And I'm really feeling for him, for this character, right? Does he have someone where he can air his feelings to in his personal life, or is that also in shambles?
It's a little bit in shambles, only because he's stubborn and doesn't realize what's wrong. He thinks a lot of his problems are money based. He thinks he doesn't earn enough money, and his partner, his wife, and his kids. He thinks he's not as great a provider as he could, because he recently changed careers. And if he would allow himself, he does have a nice, safe place to discuss things with. But he doesn't, because he feels again that would show some sort of weakness on himself, and he just pushes those feelings aside with her, and it causes some stress in the relationship for sure. And then there's some other issues as well. But yeah, one reader told me. I laughed at Steve, I cried with Steve, and I yelled at Steve. And
Yeah,
I thought, good, I've done my job.
that's a three-dimensional character right
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Yeah, like a real
yeah,
person. Yes.
yeah.
And I think like that's a very important point you make about the code basically that exists, the code of conduct, the what you can say, what you cannot say, and that you do have to follow those lines, otherwise the community will not accept you, right? Or they
Yeah.
will react in a negative way. And I think that's hugely important too, because then there's like perhaps guilt where you did something and it might have been not the best choice in that situation, and it led to, because it's such an important choice, it led to negative outcomes and maybe even a death, a fatality that maybe could have been saved. And I think of medical professions who are like of physicians who are going through that, and we're humans, we make mistakes, but the consequences, the stakes are so high that I think that will remain with you, perhaps even for life in some cases.
For sure. And the character does discuss that in the book. But what he forgets, when the rest of us understand, is that he is making the best decision at the time for what he's seeing in front of him, how that patient is presenting in the field, in a ditch after a car collision, or in a, somebody that's collapsed in their home. He's making the best decisions for the best treatment based on what he's saying, without the benefit of diagnostic tests, without the benefit of x-rays or CT scans or all those sorts of things. So he is doing his absolute best, and he's following his protocols. They're paramedics trained very deeply for this work. Obviously, they do
Mhm.
scenarios, they do drills constantly. So this stuff is just innate in him. But in spite of all of that, he will still second guess himself when calls end poorly, and beat himself up over that.
Mhm.
And you can see why, but also you this is maybe when that reader said they wanted to yell at them. You want to yell at them. It's not your fault. You did everything that you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
sometimes bad things just happen that are well beyond our control. It wouldn't matter if you had been there at the second that that happened. There's, it's not the outcome that the universe is letting happen for that person.
Yeah, so I'm an educator, so as an instructor, the stakes are not high. If I make a mistake, I know it's like no big deal. But I make it big in my mind. So also when I get like evaluations, and so majority so 98% is good, but then I focus on the 2% that for some reason find flaws in my teaching, and I think that happens to a much grander scale, of course, and I'm not minimizing it in any way. But with events like that, where he did all the right things in other calls, it's just that one call that didn't go as planned and had negative consequences.
Right. And as you know, when you're suffering some mental health, depression symptoms or anxiety, your mind tends to focus on the negative.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and it doesn't focus on the positive, even though there's all kinds of positives. Should you think of them, they would be there to kind of balance and offset this negativity. But because you're already in a bad mind state, it's almost
Yes.
like your
That's it.
mind just attracts the negative thoughts to you, and it's just a bit of a downward spiral. So yeah, absolutely.
And
And
that's the
and
negative
there's
side
high
of
stakes.
confirmation bias, right? So you're confirming, it's like, look, I told you I'm a failure. I told you I can't
Yeah,
do this, and there you go.
yeah,
This happened, right?
yeah.
And it's the negative side of that.
And exactly, I'm from a purely crafting fiction, writing stories point of view. Um, we need people to feel that with the character that as you're reading you see, oh come on Steve, like no, you're good, you did this, you did, like we need people rooting for the
Yes.
character, right? So I really kind of exploited that a bit to
Mhm.
get people to really attach to the character, and I think that's why I've gotten some of the comments that it's an emotional roller coaster and journey for people,
Yeah.
because it does really reflect all of that thinking.
So the gritty part is because, and gritty realism because it's realistic. It's like based on like things again that you've seen, experience, and you make it like you make us feel that, and like in real life. It's not just like a fictional account of things. This is like real life situations put in a fictional context, of course.
Exactly. I mean, I think it reads like it could be real. It could be an autobiography. It's told in first person, which helps. So it's Steve talking to you, to the
Mhm.
reader, telling his story, telling his point of view, and he doesn't have everything right always, but he'll still, he'll talk about his relationship. His wife's name is Annie. He'll talk about his relationship with Annie, and he'll say, it would be perfect if I just had $5,000. I could pay off this and get the car fixed and get the pump fixed and this sort of thing. And so you're reading that and you're thinking, no, Steve, it's got nothing to do with money. Like you need to talk to her.
Such a male
So,
thing to do, right? And a
totally. Yeah.
masculine thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So, what inspired you to write this specific book, and why is it called Shoebox? Would you tell us?
Oh, okay.
Hmm.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to answer that. So, what inspired me was, as I mentioned, I did write my first book, and there was a character that played a role in the opening part of that was a paramedic, and the questions I got when I would talk to people or do interviews or whatever always seemed to focus around that. So I thought, people really seem to resonate with that. So I want to write a story that is the main character of a paramedic. And then, to be honest, I would say a lot of this was cathartic for me to write. I worked as a paramedic. I've seen all kinds of things, good, bad, funny, happy, sad, all that sort of stuff. And I will say, for me as a paramedic, the calls that linger and resonate are the ones that, well, I mean, you have the good calls and the happy calls, the birth of babies and saving people, all that stuff. But
Mhm.
in terms of the bad ones that linger, for me, it's when there's unfortunately bad outcomes, such as a
Mhm.
fatality. To me, it was like not necessarily the patient, but dealing with their family.
Oh, yeah.
That for me was incredibly hard to do. And so I still, when I think about calls, I still can see and remember what I said and did to some of the families. And I like to think the solace and the comfort I get is I like to think that I provided them some comfort at their very worst point in time when they've lost a family member. So the title Shoebox,
Mhm.
it's funny. I struggled with so many titles for this book, and I couldn't come up with anything. And I found whether I've been writing for years, as I said earlier, I either find you get the title right away, or it's just super hard to find.
And it
But the
comes to you
reason
sometimes, surprisingly.
it
So I don't know.
it
Let's see what
does
your
it
story is. Yeah.
it does. So eventually, Shoebox came to me, and just the more I thought it, about it, the more it fit because Shoebox can be um, it can refer to a small dwelling place, like I live in a little shoebox apartment, or I live in a
Right.
so part
Yeah.
of the time there's the crew quarters for one of the places Steve works is tiny and it's cramped and could be described as a shoebox, and he does I think call it that. But then the kind of undercurrent for Shoebox that I'm really excited about, and I like the title for this reason, is for a lot of people that suffer from PTSD or just trauma in general, you often hear them uh, and professionals describe their memories as being like souvenirs in a shoebox, so that as an event happens, they want to file it away. So they just put a picture of it or a little, you know, abstract memento in a metaphorical shoebox and just forget about it. But the problem is, just like a shoebox full of souvenirs or memories, it may not stay tucked on the closet shelf forever. And at some point, for whatever reason, a weather pattern, a comment somebody says, a sound, a sight, a smell, whatever, triggers all these memories to
Yes.
come back. And it's like that shoebox fell off the
Mhm.
closet shelf onto the floor, and all these memories spill out on the floor, and then you have to deal with them. And that can be sad and poignant, but it's also helpful to process them and think about them. So I thought Shoebox, when I hit on that as the title, I thought that's the title for this book.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, and yeah, we do keep our memories in our shoebox, which is kind of interesting. And I hadn't
Yeah.
thought of that. And you can also
Yeah.
think outside of the shoebox, which is
Ouch on the
again,
shoebox. I
there
love
you
that,
go,
Ash.
another thing. I
And
love
and
that. Hmm.
if I could just say about the cover too, the artist that I
Sure.
worked with on the cover, because my publisher is great, he let me work with the artist. So I said to the artist, "Yeah, I want this cardboard shoebox, but in this shoebox, I want an ambulance and a bumblebee and a lighthouse and a bullet and a boat." And she said, "An ambulance and a bumblebee in a shoebox." I go, "Yeah." Said like we need to talk about perspective, Sean. But anyway, the cover is beautiful. I love it.
Awesome.
They
Awesome.
did it.
Yeah, great. I had a global leader on crisis management on my podcast, Robert Jensen, and he would respond to mass fatality situations. But he wrote a book called Personal Effects, and so the
Mm.
things that remain from the people who have passed away, because this is actually a
Ah.
different situation, right? So paramedic, there's still a chance of saving someone. This is after the effect. And so I
Mm.
found it very moving that the personal effects, that's the title of his book, and what
Interesting.
recovering the dead teaches me about caring for the living. And so how those experiences, even though they're profoundly negative, influenced his care and his appreciation and love for life and caring for others. And do you find that a similar thing happens also in the paramedic profession?
Oh, 100%. That's such a beautiful story. I love it.
Mhm.
Death is unfortunately is a part of life, and
Mhm.
it's 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 worthy to find good things out of
Mhm.
bad situations, and that for sure is definitely I think for my own experiences, and I hopefully translated them to the characters in the book. I think that's key. And one thing that reminded me of here, Arash, is we
Mhm.
had some really bad wildfires
Yes.
over the last couple of years that people lost their homes and everything. And there's this group of, I think they're mostly retired military people, but I'm not sure. But they're called Team Rubicon. And they do all kinds of good works after an event. And one thing that they did after these fires, as heartbreaking as it was, so people like were at work and they couldn't save anything and their entire homes were destroyed. Um, So Team Rubicon, after everything was settled and the fires were out and everything, would go through and sift through the ashes of these people's homes
Oh
and
my God.
get little trinkets and
Hmm.
little Christmas decorations and
Hmm.
jewelry. And it was heartwarming to see that these people who had lost everything, and yes, it's just stuff. We all understand that, but it's a trauma was a traumatic experience for them. But they would get these trinkets back, and it would just be so comforting to them and so moving for them that it was nice to see. And that's what that personal effect story reminds me of.
And yeah, and there was also a traumatologist who talked about how heroes heal was her book, and how post-traumatic stress can lead to post-traumatic growth and more resilience. So in a way, like you might say, oh, well, if I had avoided the stress, I would be happier. No, because you faced it, you have the chance of growing from it, and you get to a stage that or state that you wouldn't have gone if you hadn't had those experiences. So again, giving a positive twist to something that is difficult to digest, difficult to deal with, but it can lead to even more growth and resilience in a person.
Oh, for sure. And I know for me personally, like writing this book, I think was something I had to do to get.
Hmm.
I was never diagnosed or treated for PTSD. Um, I never sought treatment for it, though, on the other hand. So I don't know. I think I did have some symptoms, but who knows? It was just
A lot of the therapists that I have on my professionals that I have on my podcast, they use writing as a way to deal with their own issues. So you've already
exactly
there you go, you've done it.
a
You're doing
hundred
well.
percent, a
Yeah.
hundred percent, because I would actually dwell on some of the calls that I
Mhm.
experienced. And
Mhm.
I found after I wrote the book, and as you know, it's like a couple of drafts and then it's around to editing and stuff. So I was very familiar with the book. And I felt like I've kind of exercised those demons out of my
Yes.
system. And it did give me a sense of peace. And I
Yeah.
hope that's translated through to the reader that, there's always hope. Like, and even the PTSD experts, as you know, start by saying there's hope. Like there's hope if you address these and deal with this stuff. There's hope for
Mhm.
you. It's not always
Mhm.
dark and gloomy. So for me, it was a very hopeful and exciting book, and I'm very proud of it, to be honest. And
Mhm.
and you know, I hope my colleagues or the people that I worked with feel the same, and I think most of them do.
And those books that you're compelled to write, those are the best ones. Like I only write when I feel compelled, and that's like I think it works better because it's very personal. You have the passion there and so on. It's not just here to entertain, which is fine, but there's like a
Mhm.
drive where it's like I have no choice. I gotta do this.
I got to do this, yeah, for sure. And I found this one easy to write in
Hmm.
terms of sitting down at my laptop, or I'm old school. I use a fountain pen and a notebook too. But like
Sure.
actually doing the writing part of it kind of came naturally to me for the most part. I will say though, there's some sections in that book, like oftentimes when you go to events, they have you read. There's some sections in that book I could never, ever, ever read out loud because I would just be a blubbering, crying mess.
Hmm.
Uh, because they affect me that way. But
Hmm.
overall, I'm very glad I wrote this book, and it's been most helpful to me. And I hope it helps other people for whatever maybe trauma or grief they've experienced or loss in their lives.
So, are you like your readers? Do you sometimes shout at Steve Lewis as well? Do you get angry with him? Do you want to slap him?
All of the above. Yeah, for sure. And but I think that's real, right? I think
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
everybody in our lives, there's you have those that range of emotions or feeling. It's like, just smarten up, or
Mhm.
great job, or you did that. That's excellent. Or why did you do that? So yeah,
I
for
have
sure.
characters too where they do like I was like, oh my God, what were you thinking?
What
But
were you
but
thinking?
they
Yeah.
got their own life, their own decisions, their own mistakes.
Well, I found when I'm writing too, a friend of mine once said this normally happens around 100 when you get 100 pages into a manuscript. And I kind of think that too, where the character takes over the story for you. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds, you know, new age or whatever, but like
Mhm.
the character won't allow you to make him say or do something that he wouldn't do, and you've got to be responsive to that as the story moves through, uh even though it's as the creator, as the Dr. Frankenstein that's created these characters, it breaks your heart that they're making mistakes. You got to let them do it because that's what the story calls for.
At least they don't come to kill you, right? So that's you're safe in that sense.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. And what's next? What's your next plan? Do you have anything in mind for a next book, perhaps?
Oh, sure. I've got a couple of drafts of a whole bunch of things. There's the one that I'm working on right now is a family drama saga that it talks about, I guess, a theme, childhood trauma. Um, there's a little bit of supernatural, ghosty kind of stuff in it,
Ooh,
but
supernatural. I love
it's
that.
yeah, just a smidge to keep it interesting.
Mhm.
But it too is it's an older character looking back at their life, and they're both proud of some of the things that they've done and regret some of the other things, and then they're just trying to make sense of it. And it's a story set in the Maritimes as well, set in New Brunswick for this one, where I used to live as well, up in Miramichi. So yeah, I'm excited about that one. That's through about two drafts, so it's hopefully will be my next project.
Oh, you have to come back for that. Awesome.
Love to.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean Paul Bedell. You're an author, paramedic, fire service captain. Your book is Shoebox. I highly recommend it. And I mean, after hearing this, even more so. And so thank you so much for being in Arash's world.
It's been a total delight, Arash. I really, really appreciate it. Great talking with you.